All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, to get us started, I'd love to know more about who we've got in the audience. So, hands up if you are a founder or if you sell software. Okay, we've got a lot of you in the audience. Do me a favor, keep your hands up if you've found software harder to sell this year. Okay, almost everyone kept their hand up. For those that did, well, what we're going to go through today is the data that says why you feel that way. I can tell you, you're not alone. And for everyone that put their hand down, I can tell you, A, you're either lying, or B, if you could meet me over there afterwards, because I'd love to write a check into your next round. So, this presentation has a lot of data. A lot of data, in fact, it's based on data from more than 1,000 companies in 32 countries around the world. Those companies have purchased or renewed more than 300,000 software subscriptions so far this year through our platform across 4,000 different products. Every day, we get more than 2 million data points on software usage, and that makes this probably the largest data set in the world on SaaS purchasing, usage, renewal, and churn. The bad news is that by the time I finish this presentation, the data set's going to be about 30,000 items bigger. And so there's lots more to learn. Would love to talk to you afterwards. The other thing I can promise you during this presentation are three things: charts, and more charts. And I can already see a few of you taking photos. Don't worry, at the end, I'm going to give you a link so you can download this presentation and take it with you. So where does this data come from? Cloudara is a SaaS management platform that helps our customers discover, buy, manage, and cancel software. And what we've done is aggregated all that data, we've anonymized it, and then we've analyzed it to answer the question, what's really happening in the market right now? So, what is happening in the market? Now, as a founder, I much prefer talking about good news rather than bad news. So let's get the tough news out of the way first. The good news about the bad news is that none of this should be new. So those that follow VC Twitter will have heard things like OpenView saying that a Series A company this year is growing at 35% on average each year compared to 50% last year, and that their number one worry was go-to-market. We can clearly see this in the data. So what I can tell you is that this year, 93% of the average software buyer's budget is going on renewals, not new purchases. It's 93%. That means that if you're trying to sell something net new into a business, you're fighting for that 7% slice of the pie that they're allocating potentially to you or one of your competitors. This is getting harder. 2021, this number was 83%. So back then, the reason it was easier to grow was you were competing for the 17% slice, not the 7% slice. When we look at it by number of apps, it gets even harder. So companies are renewing their software stack is 95% renewals by number of apps. So again, if you're looking to sell something new, you're competing to be one of those 5% of apps that they're adding each year. Now, it's not just that they're not buying very much new software. When they're renewing, they're renewing for longer periods. They're locking themselves up. Let me show you what's going on here. This is an index. This is an index of a company's propensity to commit to an annual contract versus a monthly contract, right? And you can see that it's going up above 100, above that line there, says that they're more likely to commit to an annual contract. In fact, now they're 30% more likely to commit to an annual contract. So if you're in a competitive market, what this means is that your competitors are more likely than ever to be locking up your prospective customers on longer contracts. So you should be advising your salespeople to work really hard in discovery, really hard with the SDRs to understand when the next renewal is happening so you can drive your efforts. The other thing this says, that when you land a deal, you should be encouraging your sellers to try to sell longer term contracts, because what this says is that buyers of software are more willing than ever. They're more willing than ever to commit for a longer term. That gives you the opportunity to lock out your competitors. Now, why this isn't clear. Perhaps it means buyers are trying to drive discounts by committing to longer term contracts, and that's something that you should be thinking about. Or perhaps it's buyers trying to lock up cash flow in an environment where capital's harder to get. The other interesting thing about renewals isn't just that they're committing for longer. It isn't just that they're committing more of their budget to renewals. They're actually willing to pay more for something that they're renewing than something they're buying for the first time. So what this chart is a ratio of the average ACV, the average contract size of a renewal versus the average contract size of a new purchase. And what you can see if we walk along the chart here is that in about the third quarter of 2022, when things started getting harder, people were locking in their biggest vendors. Some things to take out of this is that 39% is the magical number. Companies are spending on average 39% more for a renewal than a new purchase. The question is, what can we learn from that? Well, the first thing is, this really advocates for a land and expand strategy, right? So be aware that you might be going into a new contract with a new customer at a lower price than your competitors, or you may have to discount to get your foot in the door to get part of that 7% wedge. What this shows is that if you invest in customer success at your next renewal, you can expect to drive up the second year's contract, and you get to show a great NRR. So do consider investing in your customer success team. The other thing this shows, and we see this across our data in lots of different ways, is that buyers of software, they churn more frequently from cheaper SaaS. So if you want to know how to reduce your churn, if you are having that as a challenge, maybe what you should consider doing is actually just increasing your prices, right? If you increase your prices, companies are, and our data shows this super clearly, less likely to churn from your product. Speaking of churn, and I promise you we're getting all the bad news out of the way first. So churn, what's going on with churn? Well, the interesting thing about churn is that behavior is different in Europe than the US. So I'm going to walk you through what you see here. This is an index of the likelihood of churning going back to the start of last year. And the green line is the behavior of US software buyers, American software buyers, versus those in UK and Europe. As we walk along, what you can see here is in the third quarter of 2022, what happened then, right? Things started getting tougher. We started talking about VC winter. There was less capital available. I can see a VC smiling in the front here, so he gets it. But what happened was American buyers of software responded much, much faster and much, much more aggressively in cutting their burn. And one of the ways they did that was not only through RIFs, which we all saw in the press, but by cleaning up their software, right? So as we walk along, we can see both European and US buyers in 2022 started churning a little bit more than they did as the year went on. But that peak of that green line shows that Americans cut more software and for longer when the market started getting tough. As we walk through to the start of Q1 2023, what had happened in Q4 was actually the NASDAQ had started going up again, right? The NASDAQ started going up, and everyone had cleaned up a bit of SaaS, and churn across the entire market fell as a result. So people had They'd cleaned house, there wasn't much more to churn, and churn bottomed. Again, interestingly, American buyers still churned much less than Europe. Now, we've had a lot of talks at Web Summit this year talking about how difficult it is to raise investment, how important efficiency is, and that is entirely true, but it's interesting to see what software buyers are doing right now. So American buyers and European buyers, they are churning from the software they use more, that churn is going back up, but Europeans, having not cleaned up their software stack this year, or last year, are doing so this year. And again, this is something we see across our data all the time. What happens in the US happens later in Europe in terms of buying behavior. And so probably the lesson is here that if you sell to both places, this will help you hedge. One last thought that I'll leave you with is there does appear to be seasonality in churn. Summer is SaaS churn season. Q1s tend to be better. So if you've come off a tough time right now, things are going to get better. Now that's all the tough news out of the way. I want to leave you on with some happy news. Every month we calculate something we call the SaaS Momentum Index. It's very simple. We look at these 1,000+ customers and give them a 0, 100, or 200 point score. If they buy less SaaS in any given month than they did the previous month, they get a score of 0. If they buy more, they get 200. And if they buy about the same, they get a score of 100. We average all those out, and if the score goes above 100, it means on average companies are expanding. And so what you see here is a few things. So the first thing you should note, the blue line, by the way, is the score. The green line is the moving average. The first thing you should note is that line is almost always above 100, which means that on average, almost always companies are spending more on software. The other thing that, and by the way, that's great for software companies, not so good for IT managers and CFOs. The other thing that you should know is that as we look here in 2023, the lines are getting a little lower. But the good news is that they're starting to turn up again. So probably we're all experiencing in this room the market getting a little bit easier. But how much easier it's getting you, again, depends on where you're selling, right? So this is that same index split by big buyers of software and small buyers of software. The blue line is the small buyers of software, the green line is the average. When the market was good, what you can see is that small buyers increase their spend more than big buyers. So venture capital's flowing, people are growing headcount, they're spending more on software. But then what happened was, as we hit VC winter, it flipped, right? So big buyers started outperforming small buyers, and they've done so for a really long time. They've done so perhaps until the summer of this year. Summer of this year, you can see the return of the small buyer, right? And this is great news. This is great news for all of us in this room that sell to SMB and mid-market, but also I argue it's better for everyone because we see that in good economies, small buyers of software expand more aggressively. So this is probably a rising tide. The other piece of good news is that software spend always increases. I can assure you that there are 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and spending more on software. And we see this in our data. So again, the blue line Europe, green line US. The other big takeaway here is that American buyers spend more on software. They increase their spend faster than European buyers. And so what you should be thinking about, first of all, definitely sell in both places, so you can pick where the market's better or worse at any moment. But also, if you are selling in both places, the data says that you should consider charging your American buyers more, because this data shows that they will definitely pay, right? There's greater propensity to pay in the US. The other certainty in life is not only is software spend always going up, the software sprawl always goes up. So again, this is an index of the number of software applications used in a company, Europe, US. Americans use more software, they add it faster. This is again, good news for all of us in this room. Percentages hide stuff, right? So where I said at the start of this talk that only 7% of a software budget is available for new software purchases, 93% for renewals. What these last two slides show us is, though it's only 7%, every year that's 7% of a pie that's bigger than it was the previous year. So there's always a way in to sell software to a company, and this data shows it. And then there's the other path. This is the other path. We did a study of exactly 200 companies that purchase and consume software. That's everyone from regulated industries like fintech or healthcare, cybersecurity companies, big, small, SOC 2 compliant, not SOC 2 compliant, and we looked at what was the nature of the software they're using. What we found was more than half of companies have half the software used in their business or more that's shadow IT. I like to think of this as the product-led growth slide, right? This is the Dropbox, get people using it, then sell the organization when they've got no choice slide. What this means is if you're having trouble accessing that 7% wedge of the pie, do think about free trials, do think about self-sign-up, do think about land and expand, because what this data shows is all the other slides that I've shown you are just for the official half of software. This is the other half. The pie chart on the right there shows which teams are using it. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. We see sales and marketing teams using a lot of SaaS. I probably should have separated a wedge for the ChatGPT wedge. We've talked a lot about AI here. ChatGPT is the single most used piece of shadow IT in a business. Also one of the most risky because of the risks with data. So to summarize, when it comes to getting your software into a company, if you can't go through the front door, think about going through the product-led back door. So I promised you how to download these slides. So that's a QR code. You'll be able to download this slide. Now, or all these slides. Now, what else do we do with this data? What else do we do with this data when we're not up here giving presentations about the software market? What we do with it is we use it to help our customers. And I'm excited today to share that we're helping our customers use this data to get value with the way they purchase and manage software in a new way. Today, we've released the SaaS Procurement Copilot that lets anyone in an organization that buys software use this data to become a proficient procurement expert. What we do is we dive into these millions of data points. We understand how you're using the software, how much you could be spending for alternative products, how much other companies like you are paying this vendor per seat. And we generate those talking points for you so you have the talk tracks to disseminate across your organization for whoever's using software so that they can level the playing field with the vendor and they know exactly what price they should be paying. This is a feature we're releasing to all our customers for free. And if you'd like to be part of that, do consider going to cladara.com and finding out. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the event.